now that we have understood REST API and Express support for REST API, let's move on to the next exercise where we will look at how we will develop the REST API using the support given by Express, and also the use of Express Router in enabling us to organize our code in a way that is more suitable when you need to support a large number of REST API endpoints. To get started, continuing with the Node Express folder where we have been working on the Express-based web server, at the prompt, let's install body parser. So to do that, type npm install body parser -- save, and we are using the 1.18.3 version of body parser in this course here. Now, once we have installed body parser, then going to our code in the index.js file, let me require body parser. So we'll say const body parser require body parser, and then whenever you need to use a middleware, you'll say app use body parser dot JSON. So this allows us to parse the body of the request message, which is formatted in JSON format. Once we have completed that, then let's start building up the REST API support for the /dishes endpoint using the app.all, app.get, put, post, and delete methods that are supported by Express. So to do that, let me start out by saying app.all, and the first parameter that app.all takes is the endpoint. So in this case, I am specifying the endpoint as /dishes, and then the second parameter is the callback function rec res next. The three parameters here, and inside this callback function, we're going to handle the incoming request. So we will say when a request comes in, for all the requests, so when we say app.all, no matter which method is invoked, get, put, post, or delete, for the /dishes REST API endpoint, this code will be executed first by default here. So we'll say res status code is 200, and then res set header, and we'll say content type text we'll send plain text now instead of HTML text. This should be enough for REST API endpoints. Later on, we will send the data in the form of JSON once we are able to retrieve the data from the database. So that'll come in one of the later exercises. For the moment, we'll simply send plain text replies back to the client. Now, after these two, the middleware here is not completed yet. So we will call the next function here. So the next, as you see, refers to this next. So when you call next, what it means is that it'll continue on to look for additional specifications down below here, which will match this dishes endpoint. So this would be done for all the requests, get, put, post, and delete on the dishes, and then it'll continue on to the next one. So here, suppose we get a get request on dishes. So which means that now if we get a get request on dishes, first this will be executed, and then the rec and res will be passed on to this second call here. So in this case, I will no longer need the next because I'm not going to call further down. I'll complete the handling right within this method here itself. So if we modify the rec or res inside this code, next, when you call the next, that modified object will be passed in as the parameter to this. So if you have issued a GET request on dishes, so this is what will be executed right after this. So this next will cause it to pass on. And then here you notice that we have modified the res object here, and that modification will carry in as the input parameter to this function here. So inside this get function, we can say, for example, at the moment, I'm simply going to send back a simple message. We'll say, will send all the dishes to you. Later on, when we retrieve the dishes information from the database, after we learn about MongoDB, then this function will be returning that JSON data back to the client if it sends a GET request here. Now, in the previous course, we had used the JSON server, and the JSON server was already providing all these for us. Now you are seeing how you would construct a real server that will process the incoming request and then generate an appropriate response and send it back to you in response to the request received from the client side. And this is where the use of Express, as we see here, is useful. So we have handled the GET. Let's handle POST also on dishes here. And again, the parameters would be rec, res, next, and that function that is invoked will be here. Now, when the GET request is received, because here you're calling res.end, so that ends the handling of the GET request, and this will trigger the reply to be sent back or response to be sent back to the client at this point. Now, if you get a POST request on dishes, again, this whole code will be executed, and then because of this next, that will drop into this function call here, and then the code here will be executed. So when you receive a POST, the POST request coming in from the server will carry some information in the body of the message in the form of JSON data. We'll see what the form of the JSON data is when we look at the later on when we test this endpoint using Postman. I'll show you what the body of the POST request message will contain. But at this point, what I'm going to do is I will extract the information from the body. And so here, when we use the body parser, what happens is that for the incoming request, the body of the incoming request will be parsed and then added into the rec object as rec.body. So the rec.body will give you access to whatever is inside the body of the message. So when I send the request, I will add information to the request body in the form of a JSON string which contains a name and a description. So I'm going to extract these two pieces of information and then print them out and then send them back to the client in the reply message. So I can say rec body dot and then name. And so the expectation is that when the client sends the POST message, the POST message body will contain a JSON string which also contains the name property in the JSON string. So rec body.name plus, and this is where I would include with details rec body dot description. So whatever the JSON string contains in the rec body, that JSON string will be parsed into a JavaScript object and added into the request object as a property body. And so this body will be the JavaScript object that points to whatever came in as the JSON string in the body of the request message. So that is why I'm able to parse the name property, the description property. You can have the price property, the image property, and all that. So if you have taken the previous course, you have seen the structure of a dish object in the form of a JSON string or the JavaScript object there. So the name and description sounds familiar to you. So that is exactly what I am using here. Right now, I am only extracting the name and the description from the body and then sending it back to the client in this body. So I'm just constructing this reply message here using the information from the body of the request message and then sending it back to the client. So that way I can confirm that the server is receiving whatever I'm sending in the body of the message. So this is the post request. Now for put, let me just copy this and then paste it here. And then for put on the dishes endpoint, because a put on the dishes endpoint doesn't make sense. A post means that you're posting a new dish to the server. A put on the dishes endpoint doesn't make sense. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reply back with the message put operation not supported on dishes. In addition, I will also include a status code of 403. 403 means the operation not supported. So if you look back at the HTTP response codes table, you will see the corresponding code 403, what it represents there. So that is what I am using for put or for post. For delete, I'm going to copy this one. And for delete, I'm going to simply parse this and then we'll say deleting all the dishes. So when you send a delete request on the /dishes endpoint, it is interpreted to mean that the client wants to delete all the dishes information on the server side. Now, this is a dangerous operation, so you make sure that you don't allow ordinary users to do. So later on, when we study authentication, we will see how we can restrict this operation to only privileged users. But again, as you see, this is a dangerous operation, so keep in mind about that. So now you see that on the dishes endpoint, we have get, put, post, and delete supported. Let's also support that on the dishes /dish ID endpoint. So I'm going to copy the get, put, post, and delete methods from here, and then cause all of them also to be supported on dishes :dish ID. So this is for the get. Let me copy that and post, put, and delete. How do we handle each of these? So for get, if I get a request on dishes /dish ID, what I would like to do is to extract this parameter and then send it back in the request, in the reply message. So we'll say, we'll send details of the dish. Now, which dish? This information is in the parameter. So this parameter value can be retrieved from rec params dot dish ID. So this dish ID, as you see, the name that you use here should match this value here. So if you just simply see ID here, this should also be correspondingly given as ID here. So the name itself doesn't mean anything except that this parameter name and this should match each other so that you can retrieve the information correctly. So we'll say send the dish parameters dish ID, and then we'll say to you. So that way we know that the server is getting the dish parameter. So if I say /dishes/23, the server will reply saying we'll send the details of the dish 23 to you, and so on. So we'll see how it works when we use Postman to test this server. Now for post, this method is not going to be supported, so I'm just going to copy this part. It doesn't make sense to do a post on a specific dish ID because you're not trying to add a new dish, but you want to modify, and modification is done by using the put operation. So we'll say post operation not supported on dishes / and then I'm going to add in the rec params dish ID. So this will send back saying post not supported on dishes /23 in the reply message. Now for put we will say res end and say will update the dish rec params dish ID or rather we'll do it this way. I'll first write, so the rest write can be used to add a line to the reply message. So we'll say updating the dish and we'll say rec params dish ID. And since this is a put operation, and if the body contains the JSON string which contains the details of the dish, I can extract the JSON string because we are using the body parser. So we'll say will update the dish colon which dish rec body name plus with details rec body description. Now when we update the dish, I want to add a new line there, so I will say \n there. So when you do a put, you are sending back the information about which dish ID you're updating and also the details that you're updating, the name and the description, which should be in the body of the put message there. For delete, we'll say deleting dish and rec params dish ID. And so for delete, this is the operation that will be performed. So you see that now we have the get, put, post, and delete operations on the dishes/dish ID endpoint, and also the get, put, post operations on the /dishes endpoint. So let's now save the changes and start our server again. Start the server by saying npm start. Let's now go to Postman and send a few requests to this server and see what it returns. Let me first issue a get to localhost 3000 and see what it returns. So when you send a request to get localhost 3000, it is still returning the index.html page because the static file handling is still in place. Now let me send a get request to localhost 3000/dishes, and this, as you expect, will send back a reply saying we'll send all the dishes to you. Now let's send a post request to localhost 3000/dishes. So this is where you can change the various methods that you want to execute. But when you send a post, you want to include some details in the body of the message because the server is expecting you to send information in the body of the message. So click on body here and click on raw here. And then for the text, you select this to JSON. So use the application JSON. So the content type would be application/JSON in the request that you send in. So since this is a JavaScript or a JSON object, so within braces, I will say name. I'll just simply type in test and description. Some standard information here. So you see that this is a JSON string which contains two properties, name and description, and the corresponding values. So let's send a post request to the server. When you send a post request to the server, as you see in the reply, it says we'll add the dish test with details description. So as you can see, the two pieces of information are extracted from the body of the JSON request that came in and then included in the reply. Let's send a put request to dishes. When you send a put request to dishes, as you see, it says put operation not supported on /dishes. And look at the status here. It says status 403 forbidden. So this operation is not allowed on this endpoint. Let's do a delete operation on the dishes. When you do a delete operation on the dishes, then you will notice that it says deleting all the dishes. So that's the reply that you get back. So you see that the get, post, put, and delete on the /dishes endpoint works as you expect. Now let's do a get on dishes /23. So 23 here is the parameter, the ID of the dish that you want to get. So when you send a request to that, the server will reply, will send details of the dish 23 to you. So you see that the parameter has been extracted from the request message and then included in the reply message. Let's do a post on this. And as you know, post is not allowed on this endpoint. And so that's why you get a status 403 forbidden on this. Let's do a put operation on that. So for the put operation, you notice that the body still contains that. So in Postman, when you type in a value here, that will be retained and can be included in other requests that you're sending. So when you send a put request on the endpoint dishes /23, so you notice that it says updating the dish 23 will update the dish, the name of the dish with details, the description of the dish here. And then let's do a delete operation on that endpoint, and then it says deleting dish 23. So those endpoints are all supported as you see in this example here. So we have done get, put, post, and delete operations on both the /dishes endpoint and also the /dishes / a dish ID endpoint. So you see how we have implemented the REST API endpoint support for one set of REST API endpoints. Now, with this, we complete the first part of this exercise. So here we have seen how we can use Express to construct and implement the REST API endpoint for the dishes. Now, this is a good time for you to do a git commit with the message Express simple REST. Going to the terminal, I will stop the server, checked that 3 of the items have been changed. So git add, git commit -m express simple REST, and check this in. So as you can see, using Express, you can easily implement support for REST API. And as you can see from this list, you construct the app get, put, post, and delete methods for all the REST API endpoints like this. Now imagine you have 1,000 REST API endpoints and you need to construct something like this. Your index.js file will explode with so many different REST API endpoints, and each one being handled using its own app.get, app.put, app.delete, and app.post. Now, Express supports a way of subdividing this work into multiple mini Express applications, which then can be combined together to form the overall Express application. This is where we will make use of the Express router to be able to construct a mini Express application. And then inside a Express router file, we will support the REST API endpoint for one group of REST API endpoints. So for example, for dishes and dishes dish ID, they can all be supported in one file. Similarly, in the assignment, you will be supporting a REST API endpoint called promotions and promotions/promo ID. And then you'll support another REST API endpoint for leaders/leaders and /leaders:\leader ID. So each of these groups can be implemented separately as mini Express applications using Express router. So that is what I will illustrate to you for the dishes endpoint in the next part of this exercise. So to do that, we realize that if we put all the files in one single folder, then again, your folder structure will look messy. So my preference is to create a folder here named routes. And this routes folder will contain all the routers that I'm going to design using the Express router. So in the routes folder, I'm going to create a new file called dishrouter.js. And this dishrouter.js file will contain the implementation of the handling of REST API endpoint for /dishes and /dishes:\dish ID endpoints. Now, how do we make use of Express router? Let's see how we can use it. Now, Express router comes together with Express, so we don't need to install yet another node module. Instead, we can work with Express that we have already installed. So to do that, at the prompt, type const express require Express. So notice that since this is a mini application, we still require Express even in this dishrouter.js file. And from your knowledge of node modules, once you define a new file, that becomes its own node module. And this node module can then be imported in index.js. So you see the connection already between how we can restructure our application into multiple files using node modules. So we'll say require Express, then we'll say const body parser require body parser. So we have already installed body parser in the previous steps of the exercise, so we can use that. Now to use an Express router, let me declare const dish router equal to Express, and on Express it supports this router interface. So we'll simply say Express router, and this will declare dish router as an Express router, so a mini Express application. And inside here I can handle the dish router related code here. So once I declare this as an Express router, then I can say dish router dot, and then on the dish router it supports a method called route method, which can take in an endpoint as a parameter. So I would simply declare this endpoint as slash. Now you're wondering, shouldn't that be dishes? Now you will pretty soon see that I need to mount this Express router in my index.js file. So in my index.js file, I will mount this Express router at the slash dishes endpoint. Mounting of an Express router. Again, one more concept that I want you to understand. Again, I'll illustrate that to you in a short while. Now, the dish router.route means that by using this approach, we are declaring the endpoint at one single location, whereby you can chain all get, put, post, delete methods already to this dish router. Now, when you look at index.js, look at the way we implemented this. So we had app.all and then slash dishes, app.get slash dishes and slash dishes. Now, if you had made a mistake and then instead of saying app.post slash dishes, instead if you just typed slash dish, then what happens? The post operation will not be supported on dishes, but it will be supported on slash dish endpoint. To avoid this problem, the Express router supports this route endpoint. On the route endpoint, you simply specify the endpoint on which this router is going to work, and then the get, put, post, and delete methods will be simply chained into that. So it will be one group of method implementations all together. So that is the reason why we use a Express router. So it comes with a couple of very useful support to make sure that your implementation is correct. So now that we are going to do that as the dish router, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this thing from here. Now the dishes ID endpoint, I'm going to leave that to you as an exercise in your first assignment. But the dishes endpoint, I'm going to cut this out all the way up to all. I'm going to cut this out from index.js file and then move that into the dish router here. Now, when I move that into the dish router, I don't need this app.all anymore. I simply chain that into the route. So I will simply say .all, and then I no longer need this endpoint definition there. That's it. So it'll say .all, and then we'll say rec res next. And this .all is operating on this particular endpoint that is already specified here. Now, not only that, we can chain the remaining methods. So that's why you see that I have removed the semicolon from here. I'm going to delete this app and then attach it on to that. So this get also gets chained into the route, and then I can remove this part. The handling will remain exactly the same as before. So similarly, I will remove the app there, and then again delete that from post, and the same thing. For put, and for delete, same thing. So notice that there is no semicolons here, here, or here, but the last one, the delete, will have the semicolon in place. So this group is one single unit implemented by using the dish router on this particular route there, and all these are chained together. And also, of course, with delete, I need to remove this endpoint. That's it. See, clean structure of the code here. So that essentially ends up implementing the dish router. But remember, this dish router is defined inside the dishrouter.js file. Now I need to export this from this node module. So to export this, I'll go to the bottom here and I'll say module exports and say dish router. That is it. So now my dish router is exporting everything that I need. Now you are looking at this and saying, oh, what about :dish ID? That is going to be part of your first assignment. Not only that, you will be implementing for 2 additional REST API endpoints also, the promotions and the leaders. But this already shows you the structure of what a Express routers implementation of REST API support looks like. So this is for dish router route. And one last thing before I forget, we should say dish router use body parser JSON. Now, once we have completed implementing the dish router, we can now go into the index.js file. Now, since this dish router is another node module, a file-based node module nevertheless, so we need to import this into our application. So right here, I'm going to import const dish router is equal to require. Now, since this is a file-based node module, I'll say /routes dish router. And once I have declared that there, then I come down into the code here, and right there I say app use, and I mount that router at an endpoint. So how do I mount the router? The first parameter here, I will specify /dishes, and the second parameter I specify dish router. And that's it. So what this means is that in my Express application, any request coming to the /dishes endpoint will be handled by dish router, and that will be done by the code that is present here, because we have said dish router route. And so notice that this says /, so which means that this is mounted at the /dishes endpoint. So that's why anything coming through /dishes will be sent over to this and will be handled by this. A big hint for you to think about how you would implement the :dish ID endpoint. You will still use the same dishrouter.js file to also implement the support for the /dishes /:dish ID endpoint. That's another big hint for you. Okay, with these changes, let's save the changes that we have done to our application and then restart our server and then take a look at how our server is going to do its work. Going to the terminal, let me restart the server by typing npm start. And once the server is up and running, I'm going to go to Postman and send requests from Postman to this server. Going to Postman, now I know that my server is only supporting the dishes endpoint. I haven't implemented the dish ID part of it. So let me send a GET request to localhost dishes, and you see that it works exactly like before. Now, if you have done a previous request in Postman, you can simply click on that and then resend that request. Put operation doesn't work. Post operation works, as you see there. And then let's cause the delete operation on the dishes, and it says deleting all dishes as expected. So this is the implementation of the REST API support using Express router. With this, we complete the second half of this exercise. This is a good time for you to do a git commit with the message Express router. Now that we have completed this exercise where we have seen how Express can be used to support the implementation of a REST API endpoint support on our server, and also the use of Express Router. It's time to move on to the first assignment, which follows this lesson.